When a billionaire CEO watched a minimum-wage janitor blow soap bubbles to calm her autistic daughter, a child no therapist could reach. She had no idea this moment would tear apart everything she thought she knew about love power and what it truly means to be a mother. Welcome to today's story. If you're new here, I'm about to take you on an emotional journey that will challenge everything you believe about success and family. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. The marble floors of Ward Core Tower's 42nd floor gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each surface polished to mirror perfection, a reflection of the empire Malina Ward had built from nothing. At 38, she commanded a pharmaceutical fortune worth $12 billion. Her name whispered in boardrooms from Manhattan to Tokyo. But standing in her corner office at 11:47 p.m., staring down at the city that never slept, Malina felt the familiar weight of a different kind of failure pressing against her chest. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Ward, the car is waiting downstairs. Your daughter's episode. It's been going on for 37 minutes now." Malina closed her eyes, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of her glass desk. 37 minutes. In the corporate world, she could negotiate a merger in less time. She could restructure an entire division, fire 100 employees, or approve a drug that would save thousands of lives. But she couldn't calm her own 8-year-old daughter. "I'll be right down," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The elevator descended in silence, each floor marking another failure in her mind. 41st floor, the time Eva had a meltdown at the charity gala, security guards forming a human wall while photographers circled like vultures. 35th floor, the day she'd hired Dr. Peterson, the country's most expensive child psychologist, only to watch Eva retreat further into herself. 27th floor, the morning she'd found Eva hiding in her closet, rocking back and forth, whispering the same 3 words over and over, "Too much noise." The lobby spread before her like a crime scene. Eva sat in the center of the polished floor, her small body curled into a tight ball, her hands pressed firmly over her ears. Her school uniform, the crisp white shirt and navy blazer of Manhattan's most exclusive private academy, was wrinkled and stained with tears. Around her, a semicircle of concerned faces had formed, building security office workers heading home late, and Dr. Sarah Chen, Eva's current therapist, kneeling helplessly 3 feet away. "She won't respond to any of our usual techniques," Dr. Chen said, her voice strained with professional frustration. "I've tried the pressure vest, the noise-canceling headphones, even the weighted blanket. Nothing's working." Malina felt the familiar burn of tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here. Not in front of witnesses who would tweet about it before morning. How long has she been like this? Since she got off the school bus. Something triggered her in the elevator, maybe the construction noise from the renovation upstairs, maybe the crowd of people. "You know how sensitive she is to—" "I know how sensitive my daughter is," Malina snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. Dr. Chen was trying to help. They were all trying to help. But Eva remained unreachable, lost in a world where every sound felt like a physical assault, where every touch burned like fire. From across the lobby, she noticed a figure approaching, a man in his mid-30s, wearing the building's standard maintenance uniform. His name tag read Lucas, and he carried a small bucket filled with cleaning supplies. Most people would have walked around the scene, given the obvious drama a wide berth. Instead, Lucas set down his bucket and studied the situation with an expression Malina couldn't quite read. "Sir, you need to move along," one of the security guards said, stepping forward. "This is a private matter." But Lucas didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Eva, and Malina saw something in his face that she recognized, not pity, not curiosity, but understanding. It was the look of someone who had been where Eva was, who knew what it felt like to be trapped inside your own overwhelmed nervous system. "She's overstimulated," Lucas said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Malina to hear. "Look at her hands, the way she's pressing them to her ears. And her breathing. She's trying to block out everything, but there's too much." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. "I'm sorry, but are you qualified to—" "I'm qualified to recognize a child in distress," Lucas interrupted, but his voice remained gentle. "And I'm qualified to know that sometimes the simplest solutions work better than the complicated ones." Malina found herself stepping closer, something about this stranger's calm confidence cutting through her panic. "What do you mean?" Lucas reached into his cleaning bucket and pulled out a small bottle of dish soap, the kind used for washing windows. From his pocket, he retrieved a plastic bubble wand, the sort that came in dollar store bubble kits. "Sometimes," he said, "when the world gets too loud, you need to give the mind something beautiful and simple to focus on." "Bubbles." Dr. Chen's voice carried a note of professional skepticism. "Sir, this child has severe sensory processing issues. She's not going to be distracted by—" But Lucas was already moving. He approached Eva slowly, each step deliberate and careful, like someone approaching a frightened animal. When he was about 6 feet away, close enough to be present, far enough not to invade her space, he sat down on the cold marble floor, crossed his legs, and began to blow bubbles. The first bubble emerged slowly, catching the lobby's chandelier light as it drifted upward. Then another. Then a stream of them, each one perfect and iridescent, floating through the space like tiny planets in a miniature solar system. For a moment, nothing changed. Eva remained curled in her protective ball, her breathing still rapid and shallow. But then, almost imperceptibly, one of her hands moved away from her ear. Not far, just enough to create a small gap through which one eye could peek out. Another bubble drifted past her line of sight, and Malina watched her daughter's breathing slow just a fraction. Lucas continued his work in silence, creating bubble after bubble, with the patience of someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed. "Blue," Eva whispered so quietly that Malina almost missed it. Lucas paused his wand halfway to his lips. "What's that, sweetheart?" "The bubbles are blue," Eva said, her voice still muffled by her hands, but clearer now. "On the edges. They're blue like safe." Malina felt her knees nearly buckle. Eva hadn't spoken to a stranger in over 6 months. The last time had been to tell a grocery store clerk that his voice was too sharp, before retreating into silence for the rest of the day. "You're right," Lucas said, continuing to blow bubbles. "They are blue on the edges. What else do you see?" Eva slowly uncurled herself, sitting up but keeping her knees drawn to her chest. "Purple and yellow, like sunshine, but quiet sunshine." "Quiet sunshine," Lucas repeated, nodding as if this made perfect sense. "I like that. What would loud sunshine look like?" For the first time in months, Malina saw something that might have been a smile flicker across her daughter's face. Loud sunshine would be orange. Orange is shouty. "Orange is definitely shouty," Lucas agreed, and this time Eva did smile, a small tentative thing, but real. "What about green? Green is—" Eva paused, considering. "Green is like when you're hiding under blankets, and it's warm, and no one can find you, but in a good way." The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the security guards had stopped their pacing to watch this impossible conversation unfold. Malina realized she was holding her breath, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile connection. Lucas blew another stream of bubbles, and Eva actually reached out to touch one. It popped against her finger with the softest whisper of sound, and instead of flinching, She laughed a sound Malina hadn't heard in so long, she'd almost forgotten what her daughter's laughter sounded like. "Can I try?" Eva asked, her voice growing stronger. Lucas handed her the bubble wand, and Eva dipped it carefully into the soap solution. Her first attempt produced only a few drops of soapy water, but Lucas showed her how to blow more gently, how to let the air carry the film rather than forcing it. When Ava's first perfect bubble emerged and floated upward, she clapped her hands together in delight, completely forgetting her earlier distress. "I made quiet sunshine." "You did," Lucas said, and the warmth in his voice made Malina's chest tight with emotion. "You made something beautiful." Dr. Chen was furiously taking notes, muttering something about unconventional therapeutic approaches. But Malina barely heard her. She was watching her daughter. Really watching her for what felt like the first time in months. Ava was still. Eva still sensitive, still easily overwhelmed, still living in a world that often felt too bright and too loud. But in this moment, with soap bubbles floating around her like tiny miracles, she was also something else. She was happy. The moment stretched on for several more minutes, Eva and Lucas taking turns with the bubble wand, discussing the colors they saw and the shapes the bubbles made. Eva told him about her collection of blue things at home, and Lucas shared that his daughter also loved blue, though she preferred ocean blue to sky blue. "You have a daughter?" Eva asked, her curiosity overcoming her usual wariness of personal questions. "I do. Her name is Becca, and she's just about your age. She loves art and music and making things with her hands." Is she different like me?" Lucas paused, considering his words carefully. Everyone's different in their own way. Becca sees the world differently than some people do, and so do you. That's not a bad thing. It just means you notice things other people miss. Eva nodded as if this made perfect sense. "What kind of things?" "Well, you noticed the blue in the bubbles. Most people just see bubbles and think bubble. But you saw colors and feelings and quiet sunshine. That's a gift." Malina felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or despair. For the first time in years, someone was talking to Eva about her differences, as if they were something wonderful rather than something to be fixed. Eventually, the spell began to fade. Ava's movements became slower, her responses more delayed. Malina recognized the signs of her daughter reaching her social interaction limit, not a meltdown this time, but a gentle withdrawal. "I think," Ava said quietly, "I'm ready to go home now." Lucas nodded and began packing up his simple supplies. "Thank you for sharing the bubble time with me, Eva. That was really special. Will you—" Eva hesitated, then looked directly at Lucas for the first time. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "I work here most days," Lucas said, "Monday through Friday." Eva nodded, satisfied with this answer. She stood up, smoothed down her wrinkled uniform, and walked over to where Malina stood, frozen in amazement. "Hi, Mama," Eva said, as if the last hour hadn't happened, as if she hadn't just emerged from one of her worst episodes in months to have a normal conversation with a complete stranger. "Hi, baby." Malina managed her voice thick with emotion. She wanted to scoop Eva into her arms to hold her tight and never let go, but she knew that would be too much stimulation after everything her daughter had just been through. Instead, she offered her hand, and Eva took it. As they walked towards the elevator, Malina turned back to thank Lucas, but he had already disappeared. His cleaning supplies were gone, and the only evidence of what had just happened was a few soap bubbles still floating near the ceiling, catching the light as they slowly popped one by one. In the elevator, Eva leaned against Malina's side, not quite a hug, but closer than they'd been in weeks. "Mama." "Yes, sweetheart." The bubble man understood about colors. He did. Most people don't understand about colors. Malina thought about this as they rose through the floors of her tower, past all the offices where people worked to heal the world, through science and medicine, past all the conference rooms where she'd made decisions that affected millions of lives. What don't they understand? They think colors are just colors. But colors have feelings. Blue is safe, green is cozy, yellow is happy but not too happy, purple is mysterious but not scary mysterious. What about red? Eva considered this seriously. Red is brave, but sometimes red is angry brave and sometimes red is love brave. You have to be careful with red. The elevator dinged softly as they reached the parking garage. And what color was tonight, baby? Eva was quiet for a long moment, her small hand still nestled in Malina's. Tonight was blue, she finally said. Tonight was safe. As they walked to the waiting car, Malina found herself thinking about the man who had appeared like some kind of guardian angel, armed with nothing but dish soap and an understanding of what her daughter needed. She didn't even know his last name, didn't know anything about him, except that he had a daughter named Becca and an extraordinary ability to see Eva really see her in a way that no therapist or specialist had managed. The car ride home was peaceful, Eva staring out the window at the city lights, occasionally pointing out colors that caught her attention. Malina found herself making mental notes, the way Lucas had approached, slowly had given Eva space, had spoken to her, as if her observations about colors were not only valid, but valuable. The way he had turned her differences into gifts rather than deficits. By the time they pulled into the driveway of their Upper East Side townhouse, Eva had fallen asleep against the window, her face peaceful in a way Malina hadn't seen in months. The security team helped transfer her to her bedroom without waking her, and Malina found herself standing in Eva's doorway, watching her daughter sleep and thinking about quiet sunshine. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found her head of security. Richard, I need you to find out everything you can about one of the maintenance workers at Wardcore Tower. His name is Lucas, and he was working the evening shift tonight. I want a full background check on my desk by morning. Is there a problem, Ms. Ward? Malina looked at her sleeping daughter at the small smile still playing around the corners of Eva's mouth. No, she said quietly. There's not a problem. For the first time in a very long time, there's not a problem. After hanging up, she walked to her own bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself at her laptop, researching everything she could find about sensory processing disorders, about alternative therapies, about the simple power of human connection. She read until dawn, filling pages with notes as her business mind, already working on a plan she couldn't quite articulate yet. Somewhere in the pre-dawn hours, as she sat surrounded by research papers and empty coffee cups, Malina Ward, who had built an empire by trusting data over instinct, science over intuition, made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find Lucas, and she was going to ask him to help her learn how to really see her daughter. She had no idea that this decision would tear apart everything she thought she knew about love, about power, and about what it truly meant to protect the people you care about most. She had no idea that a janitor with a bottle of dish soap was about to become the most dangerous person in her carefully controlled world. All she knew was that for 37 minutes, her daughter had been unreachable, lost in a storm of overwhelming sensation. And then a stranger had sat down on a marble floor and blown bubbles, and Eva had found her way back to the world. Sometimes Malina was beginning to understand the most profound miracles come in the simplest packages. As the sun rose over Manhattan, painting Eva's room in shades of gentle gold, Malina finally allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, There was a different way forward, one that didn't require fixing her daughter, but rather learning to see the world through her extraordinary eyes. The Bubble Man had shown them both something beautiful that night. Now Malina had to figure out what to do with this gift, and whether she was brave enough to let it change everything she thought she knew about being a mother. Outside Eva's window, the city was waking up 8 million people beginning another day in their own separate worlds. But in this quiet townhouse, in this peaceful bedroom, two people who had felt alone for so long were finally beginning to understand that they weren't as different as they'd thought, and that sometimes the most important connections happen when you least expect them, with people who see the world not as it is, but as it could be. The morning would bring new challenges, new questions, and new possibilities. But for now, in the soft light of dawn, there was only this: a mother watching her daughter sleep, and the lingering memory of soap bubbles floating through the air like promises of better days to come. The manila folder landed on Malina's desk at exactly 7:43 a.m., with the weight of a potential earthquake. Richard had outdone himself. The background check on Lucas Hale was thorough enough to reconstruct his entire life story. As Malina flipped through the pages, her coffee growing cold in her hand, she felt the familiar tension of a CEO discovering that the world was more complicated than her carefully constructed assumptions had allowed. Lucas David Hale, 34 years old, divorced single father, to Rebecca. Becca Hale, age 9. Former special education teacher at Lincoln Elementary in Queens, laid off 3 years ago during budget cuts. No criminal record, excellent credit, despite modest income, currently employed by Morrison Cleaning Services on the overnight maintenance crew at Ward Core Tower. Current salary $32,000 annually. But it was the personal details that made Malina's breath catch. Lucas's ex-wife Jennifer had left when Becca was diagnosed with autism at age 5, unable to handle what she called the burden of a broken child. The divorce papers, somehow included in Richard's impossibly thorough research, contained a handwritten note from the judge expressing sympathy for a father who had chosen to fast for custody of a special needs child when most people would have walked away. Malina turned the page and found school records, medical files, and a letter of recommendation from Dr. Maria Santos, a developmental pediatrician at Mount Sinai. The letter, written for a job application Lucas had submitted to a therapeutic writing center, painted a picture of a father who had transformed his entire life around his daughter's needs. He had learned sign language, studied sensory integration therapy, and even taken courses in art therapy, all to better understand and support Becca. The most revealing document was a court filing from 2 years ago when Jennifer had attempted to regain custody, claiming that Lucas was enabling Becca's autism rather than seeking proper treatment. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Mr. Hale has demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to understanding and supporting his daughter's unique needs. His approach, which focuses on acceptance and accommodation rather than forced normalization, has resulted in measurable improvements in Becca's emotional regulation and social engagement. Custody will remain with the father. Malina closed the folder and stared out her office window at the morning traffic crawling through Manhattan. Everything about Lucas Hale's story contradicted her assumptions about class education and expertise. Here was a man making poverty wages who understood her daughter better in 30 minutes than teams of highly paid specialists had managed in years. Her intercom buzzed. "Miss Ward. Your 9 a.m. is here, Dr. Whitman from the Pediatric Neurology Department." Malina had scheduled this meeting weeks ago, another consultation with another expert who would tell her the same things she'd heard a dozen times before Eva needed more structure, more therapy, more intensive intervention. But now, with Lucas's file still warm in her hands, she found herself questioning everything. "Send him in." Dr. Harrison Whitman entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. His credentials were impeccable: Harvard Medical School fellowship at Johns Hopkins, author of 3 books on pediatric neurodevelopmental disorders. He settled into the chair across from her desk with his leather portfolio and began spreading papers across her coffee table. Ms. Ward, I've reviewed Eva's files extensively, and I believe we need to discuss more intensive intervention strategies. Her current therapeutic approach isn't aggressive enough for her level of need. What kind of intervention? Malina asked, though she was beginning to suspect she wouldn't like the answer. I'd recommend enrollment in our residential program. Eva would live at the facility Monday through Friday, receiving intensive behavioral modification therapy, social skills training, and sensory integration work. It's expensive, about $15,000 per month, but for children with her level of impairment, it's often the only way to achieve meaningful progress. The word impairment hit Malina like a physical blow. Last night, Lucas had called Eva's differences a gift. This morning, Dr. Whitman was using the language of deficiency and damage. What would this intensive therapy look like? Dr. Whitman opened his portfolio and pulled out a thick manual. Structured behavioral programming. Eva would follow a strict schedule designed to reduce her sensory-seeking behaviors and increase her tolerance for normal environmental stimuli. We use a point system to reward appropriate responses and consequences, to discourage self-stimulatory behaviors like hand-flapping or verbal repetition. Malina thought about Eva the night before, clapping with joy when she created her first perfect bubble. Under Dr. Whitman's program, that spontaneous expression of happiness would have been labeled a self-stimulatory behavior requiring correction. And what's your success rate? 70% of our graduates are able to function in mainstream educational settings with minimal support. Many go on to live independently. What about the other 30%? Dr. Whitman's confident expression flickered slightly. Some children require longer-term residential care. But Ms. Ward, the alternative is allowing Eva to remain trapped in her current limitations. Without intensive intervention, children like her rarely achieve their full potential. Children like her. The phrase echoed in Malina's mind as she remembered Eva's analysis of colors, her ability to see blue on the edges of soap bubbles where others saw only transparent spheres. Was that a limitation, or was it a way of perceiving the world that most people had lost? I need to think about this, Malina said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. Dr. Whitman gathered his papers with barely concealed frustration. Ms. Ward, I understand this is difficult, but delay only makes intervention more challenging. Eva is 8 years old. If we wait much longer, her patterns will become increasingly fixed. After he left, Malina sat alone in her office, staring at the 2 documents that represented completely different philosophies about her daughter's future. Dr. Whitman's glossy brochures promised to fix Eva, to make her normal, to help her achieve her full potential, by teaching her to suppress the very traits that made her unique. Lucas's background suggested a different possibility, that Eva didn't need to be fixed because she wasn't broken. She picked up her phone and dialed building maintenance. Morrison Cleaning Services, this is Dave. This is Malina Ward from the executive offices. I need to speak with one of your employees, Lucas Hale. Lucas, he works nights, ma'am. Won't be in until around 6 p.m. Is there a problem? No problem. Can you give me his contact information? There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm not supposed to give out personal information about employees. Company policy. Malina closed her eyes, feeling the familiar urge to use her power to bulldoze through obstacles. She could have Richard make a call, could threaten to change cleaning companies, could have Lucas's information within the hour. But something about the bubble man's gentle approach made her reconsider. Of course, I understand. Could you ask him to call me when he comes in tonight? It's regarding the incident in the lobby last evening. Sure thing, Ms. Ward. I'll leave him a message. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Malina found her attention constantly drifting to the evening ahead. She rearranged her schedule, canceling a dinner with the mayor, to ensure she'd be home when Eva returned from school. For the first time in months, she wanted to see how her daughter was doing, without the filter of nannies and caregivers. Eva's school bus pulled up at 3:47 p.m., and Malina watched from the living room window as her daughter descended the steps with careful precision. Eva's backpack was perfectly arranged, her uniform still crisp despite 8 hours of wear. To anyone else, she might have looked like any other well-dressed private school student. But Malina was beginning to notice the details she'd missed before the way Eva paused at the bottom of the bus steps to count to 5 before walking the careful distance she maintained from other children. The almost invisible tension in her shoulders that spoke of a day spent navigating a world that felt too intense. "How was school, sweetheart?" Malina asked as Eva hung her backpack on its designated hook in the entryway. "Loud," Eva said simply. Mrs. Patterson used the pencil sharpener 17 times during math. The sound was yellow sharp. Malina found herself genuinely curious rather than concerned. Yellow sharp? What does that feel like? Eva paused, clearly surprised by the question. Most adults either ignored her color descriptions or tried to correct them. Like when you bite into a lemon, but with your ears instead of your mouth. It makes your shoulders go up. She demonstrated hunching her shoulders toward her ears. That sounds uncomfortable. It is. But I counted the bubbles on my water bottle, and that helped. Counting makes the yellow sharp smaller. Malina felt a flash of pride mixed with sadness. Eva had developed her own coping strategies, her own ways of managing a sensory world that often felt overwhelming. How many of these quiet victories had Malina missed because she was so focused on what Eva couldn't do rather than what she could? They were settling in for an afternoon snack when Malina's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Ward, this is Lucas Hale. Dave said you wanted to speak with me." Just hearing his voice brought back the memory of the night before Eva's transformation from unreachable distress to genuine joy. "Yes, thank you for calling. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with Eva yesterday." There was a pause. "Is she okay? I hope I didn't overstep any boundaries." "She's fine. More than fine, actually. You did something that no one else has been able to do in months. I'd like to understand how." Another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Ward, I'm not sure what you mean. I just saw a kid who was overwhelmed and I tried to help. Could we meet? I know this is unusual, but I'd like to talk to you about Eva, about what you saw last night that everyone else missed." Well, I suppose so. When did you have in mind?" Malina looked at Eva, who was arranging her apple slices in careful rows on her plate. "Would you be available this evening after your shift?" "My shift ends at midnight, ma'am. That might be a little late for—" "I'll wait," Malina said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This is important." At 12:17 a.m., Malina sat in the empty lobby of Ward Core Tower, having sent the night security team home early. She'd changed from her business suit into jeans and a sweater, an almost unprecedented wardrobe choice that felt appropriate for this unprecedented conversation. The marble floors that had seemed so elegant during the day now felt cold and impersonal, and she found herself wondering what Eva had thought when she'd been sitting here in distress. Lucas emerged from the elevator carrying his cleaning supplies, looking tired but alert. In the harsh lobby lighting, Malina could see the details she'd missed the night before: the laugh lines around his eyes, the careful way he moved, the gentle strength in his hands that had blown those miraculous bubbles. "Ms. Ward, you're here late." Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know this is unusual. Lucas set down his supplies and sat in one of the lobby chairs, gesturing for her to do the same. Your daughter, how is she today? Better. She told me about yellow sharp sounds and counting bubbles on her water bottle. She's never shared details like that with me before. A smile crossed Lucas's face. Becca talks about sounds having colors too. Says the microwave is angry orange and the washing machine is sleepy blue. Your daughter, she's autistic too. She is. Diagnosed at 5, though I suspected earlier. Jennifer, my ex-wife, she wanted to find doctors who could cure Becca, make her normal. Took me a while to realize that normal was overrated. Malina leaned forward, her business instincts recognizing someone with valuable knowledge. What changed your mind? Lucas was quiet for a moment, his fingers unconsciously moving, as if he were still holding a bubble wand. There was this day when Becca was about 6. She'd been having a particularly hard week. Lots of meltdowns, lots of therapy appointments, where people tried to teach her to make eye contact and sit still and be like everyone else. I was exhausted, she was exhausted, and I just gave up on the agenda for the day. What did you do instead? We went to Central Park and I let her lead. She spent 2 hours studying the patterns in tree bark, running her fingers along the ridges and grooves. She started humming this complex melody I'd never heard before. When I asked her about it, she said the trees were singing and she was singing back. Malina felt something shift in her understanding. What did you learn from that? That she wasn't broken. She was just experiencing the world in a way I'd never considered. The tree bark wasn't just bark to her, it was texture and pattern and music. She was having a rich, complex experience that most people walk right past, without noticing. But surely she needs help navigating the regular world, school, social situations, daily life. Of course she does. But there's a difference between teaching someone skills to navigate the world and trying to change who they fundamentally are. Becca's learned to handle crowded spaces and loud noises, but she still sees music in tree bark. I wouldn't want to take that away from her. Malina thought about Dr. Whitman's residential program, designed to eliminate exactly those kinds of unique perceptions. How do you balance helping her function with accepting who she is? Lucas leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. I think about it like this: if someone was left-handed, you wouldn't try to make them right-handed. You'd teach them to navigate a right-handed world while still honoring their natural way of doing things. Becca's brain is wired differently, but that wiring includes gifts as well as challenges. What kind of gifts? She notices everything. Patterns, inconsistencies, details that everyone else misses. She's incredibly honest, can't lie, even when it would be easier. She feels things deeply, loves completely. When she's happy, it's like watching pure joy. When she's sad, she grieves with her whole heart. Malina felt tears threatening as she recognized Eva in this description. The doctors keep telling me about all the things Eva can't do. They want to put her in a residential program to teach her to be normal. And what do you want? The question caught Malina off guard. As a CEO, she was accustomed to having clear objectives, measurable outcomes, strategic plans. But when it came to Eva, she realized she'd been so focused on fixing problems that she'd never stopped to consider what success actually looked like. I want her to be happy, she said finally. I want her to feel safe in the world. I want her to know that she's loved exactly as she is. Those are good goals, Lucas said gently, and they're achievable. But they might require you to redefine what progress looks like. They talked until nearly 2 a.m., Lucas sharing stories about Becca's journey and the hard-won insights he'd gained as a single father, navigating the world of special needs parenting. He told her about the teachers who had seen Becca's potential versus those who had only seen deficits. He described the moment when Becca had first trusted him enough to share her internal experience and how that trust had transformed their relationship. "The thing is," Lucas said as they prepared to leave, "kids like Eva and Becca, they can sense when people see them as problems to be solved versus people to be understood. Eva knew immediately that I wasn't trying to fix her. I was just trying to be present with her." As Malina rode the elevator up to her car, she found herself thinking about presence versus fixing, understanding versus curing. She thought about Eva's careful arrangement of apple slices and her sophisticated analysis of colors and sounds. She thought about the joy on her daughter's face when the first perfect bubble had emerged from her efforts. By the time she reached home, Malina had made a decision that would have shocked her business associates and terrified her board of directors. She was going to trust a janitor's wisdom over a Harvard-trained neurologist's expertise. She was going to bet everything on the possibility that her daughter didn't need to be fixed because she had never been broken. The next morning, she called Dr. Whitman's office and politely declined enrollment in the residential program. Then she made a much more difficult call. "Morrison Cleaning Services, this is Dave. This is Malina Ward. I'd like to offer Lucas Hale a position with my company. Ma'am, Lucas is a good employee, but if there's been some kind of problem..." "There's no problem. I want to hire him as a consultant. Is he available to speak with me today?" When Lucas arrived at Ward Court Tower that afternoon, still wearing his maintenance uniform and looking confused about why the building's owner wanted to see him. During daylight hours, Malina was waiting in her office with a proposal that would change both their lives. "I want to hire you," she said without preamble. "Not as maintenance staff, but as someone to help me understand Eva. To teach me what you know about reaching children like her." Lucas sat in the chair across from her desk, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Ward, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a therapist. I don't have credentials or training in..." "You have something better than credentials," Malina interrupted. "You have experience. You have understanding. You saw Eva in 30 minutes what teams of specialists have missed in years. What exactly are you proposing?" Malina took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to suggest would sound insane to anyone who thought rationally about corporate hierarchy and social boundaries. "I want you to spend time with Eva, help her develop coping strategies, teach me how to see the world through her eyes, show me how to be the mother she needs instead of the mother I think she should have." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was serious. "And what about my daughter? I can't take a job that requires me to work during the hours when Becca needs me." "Bring her." Malina said the words tumbling out before she'd fully considered their implications. "Eva talked about colors and bubbles all morning. I think she'd like to meet someone who understands the way she sees things." "You want me to bring my autistic daughter to help with your autistic daughter?" When he put it like that, it sounded even more unconventional than Malina had realized. But she thought about Eva's smile when the bubbles had appeared, about the careful way Lucas had approached her daughter's distress, about the possibility that connection might be more healing than intervention. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to try something completely different. I want to see what happens when we stop trying to fix them and start trying to understand them." Lucas stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street, where regular people lived regular lives, without billion-dollar empires to manage or special needs children to raise. "Ms. Ward, I make $32,000 a year. You probably spend more than that on your daughter's therapy in a month. Why would you trust someone like me with something so important?" Malina joined him at the window, thinking about the vast distance between their worlds and the small moment of connection that had somehow bridged it. "Because you gave my daughter something that all my money couldn't buy. You gave her a moment of pure joy, and you did it with soap bubbles and patience and the simple act of seeing her as she really is." When Lucas turned to face her, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, hope mixed with fear, the look of someone who had been offered something too good to be true but was afraid to believe it. "If I say yes," he said quietly, "things will get complicated. People will have opinions about a janitor spending time with your daughter. They'll question your judgment, my motives, everything about this arrangement." Malina thought about her board of directors, her carefully managed public image, the delicate ecosystem of wealth and power that she'd spent her career building. Then she thought about Eva arranging apple slices and counting bubbles and seeing blue on the edges of transparent spheres. "Let them question," she said. "For the first time in my daughter's life, I've seen her truly happy. That's worth any amount of complications." And so, in a conversation that lasted less than an hour but would reshape both their futures, Malina Ward made the most dangerous decision of her carefully controlled life. She chose trust over expertise, connection over credentials, and the wisdom of a man who understood that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from trying to change someone, but from learning to see the world through their extraordinary eyes. What neither of them realized was that this decision would soon test every assumption they held about love, family, and what it meant to protect the people they cared about most. The storm was coming, and it would challenge everything they thought they knew about the price of choosing love over convention. The first meeting between Eva and Becca was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock in the neutral territory of Central Park's Conservatory Garden. Malina had chosen the location carefully outdoors to reduce sensory overwhelm, beautiful enough to inspire wonder, and public enough that Lucas might feel more comfortable in this unprecedented arrangement. She arrived 20 minutes early, her anxiety manifesting in the kind of meticulous preparation that had served her well in boardrooms, but felt inadequate for the delicate choreography of introducing two special children who might either connect beautifully or retreat into their separate worlds. Eva sat on the bench beside her legs swinging freely, wearing her favorite blue dress and clutching a small notebook where she'd been documenting the colors she observed in the garden. "Mama, the flowers are arguing," she announced, pointing toward a bed of mixed tulips. "Arguing. The red ones are shouting, and the yellow ones are trying to calm them down, but the purple ones are just being mysterious and not helping at all." Malina found herself smiling, remembering Lucas's words about learning to see the world through Eva's eyes. 3 months ago, she would have corrected this kind of anthropomorphization, gently explaining that flowers don't have emotions. Now she found herself genuinely curious about Eva's perception. What would help them stop arguing? Eva considered this seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Maybe if we planted some blue ones in between. Blue is peaceful. Blue makes everything calmer." Before Malina could respond, she spotted Lucas walking toward them along the garden path, his daughter beside him. Becca was smaller than Eva, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and paint stains on her jeans that spoke of a morning spent in creative pursuits. She moved with the careful deliberation that Malina was beginning to recognize as characteristic of children who had to work harder to navigate the world's sensory complexity. "Eva," Malina said softly, "remember Lucas from the bubble night? He's here with his daughter Becca." Eva looked up from her notebook, her expression shifting from open curiosity to careful assessment. She studied Becca with the intensity she usually reserved for her color observations, taking in details that most people would miss, the way Becca's hands moved in small, repetitive patterns, the slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she was processing multiple sensory inputs simultaneously, the careful distance she maintained from the crowds of tourists walking through the garden. Lucas approached with the same gentle confidence he'd shown in the lobby that night, pausing just close enough to be conversational, but far enough to give both girls space to adjust. "Good afternoon, Ms. Ward." Eva This is my daughter, Becca. Becca offered a small wave but didn't make eye contact, her gaze fixed on something just past Eva's shoulder. "Hello," she said quietly. "Your dress is the color of safe skies." Eva's entire demeanor shifted, her careful assessment melting into something that might have been recognition. "You see colors with feelings too. All the time," Becca said, finally looking directly at Eva. "Most people think I'm weird when I talk about it." "Most people don't understand about colors," Eva agreed solemnly. "They think yellow is just yellow, but yellow can be happy warm, or scary sharp, or careful bright. Or sick sour," Becca added, and both girls made identical faces of disgust that made Lucas chuckle. Malina watched this exchange with fascination, seeing her daughter engage with a peer in a way she'd never witnessed before. At school, Eva's interactions were stilted and careful, full of the social scripts her therapists had taught her. But with Becca, she was speaking her natural language, the complex vocabulary of sensory experience that most people couldn't understand. "Would you like to walk through the garden?" Lucas suggested. "Becca brought her sketchbook, and I thought maybe you could both draw some of the things you see." The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of discovery. Eva and Becca moved through the garden at their own pace, stopping frequently to examine flowers, textures, and patterns that caught their attention. They developed an instant shorthand for communicating their sensory experiences. Becca would point to a plant and say, "Fuzzy purple thinking sounds." And Eva would nod, as if this made perfect sense, adding her own observation about whisper green growing music. Malina found herself walking beside Lucas, both of them serving as quiet guardians to this remarkable interaction. "I've never seen Eva so relaxed with another child," she admitted. "Becca either," Lucas replied. "Usually it takes her weeks to warm up to new people, but Eva speaks her language." They paused near a fountain where both girls had become fascinated by the patterns the water made as it fell. Eva was sketching in her notebook, while Becca pulled out a small watercolor set and began painting directly onto the paper, her brushstrokes capturing not just the visual aspects of the fountain, but somehow conveying the sound and movement as well. "Becca's incredibly talented," Malina observed, watching the 9-year-old create something that looked more like synesthesia made visible than a traditional landscape. "She sees connections that most people miss," Lucas said, with quiet pride. "Last month she painted our apartment building, but instead of showing how it looks, she painted how it feels, all the different emotions of the people living inside represented as colors flowing through the windows." Eva looked up from her own drawing and peered at Becca's painting. "That's exactly what the water sounds like," she said with excitement. "Like blue music with silver laughing." Becca beamed, the first completely unguarded expression Malina had seen from her. "You can hear it too." "I can hear lots of things. Sometimes I hear colors and see sounds. Mama's doctors think it's strange." "It's not strange," Becca said firmly. "It's just different. Dad says different is good, because if everyone was the same, the world would be boring." Malina felt something tight in her chest loosen as she watched her daughter's face light up with the joy of being understood. For months, Eva's unique perceptions had been treated as symptoms to be managed, or quirks to be corrected. But sitting here with Becca, they became gifts to be shared and celebrated. As the afternoon progressed, the girls' initial connection deepened into something that looked remarkably like friendship. They discovered shared interests beyond their synesthetic experiences. Both loved collecting small objects with interesting textures, both had strong opinions about the emotional qualities of different foods, and both had developed elaborate internal worlds that helped them make sense of environments that often felt overwhelming. "Becca," Eva said as they settled on a blanket Lucas had brought, "do you have safe places?" "You mean like hiding places?" "Sort of. places where everything feels right, where the colors are calm and the sounds don't hurt. Becca nodded eagerly. My closet at home. It's small and dark and it smells like lavender because Dad put sachets in there. When the world gets too much, I go sit in there and everything gets quiet. I have a reading nook, Eva said. It's under the stairs in our house and I put blue lights in there and soft blankets. Sometimes I pretend I'm underwater where everything is slow and peaceful. Lucas and Malina exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of the girls sharing these intimate details about their coping strategies. It was the kind of information that therapists spent months trying to extract, offered freely in the context of genuine friendship. Maybe, Becca said carefully, sometime you could show me your reading nook and I could show you my closet. Eva's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, and we could bring art supplies and make the spaces even more beautiful. Watching this exchange, Malina felt a shift in her understanding that was both profound and unsettling. All of Eva's expensive therapies had focused on helping her function in the neurotypical world, teaching her to suppress her natural responses and mimic socially acceptable behaviors. But here with Becca, Eva was learning something entirely different, that her way of experiencing the world was not just acceptable but valuable, that she could find connection and friendship without pretending to be someone else. The realization was accompanied by a growing unease as Malina began to consider the practical implications of this new friendship. How would she explain to Eva's school that she was learning more from an afternoon with Lucas's daughter than from months of professional intervention? How would she justify to her board of directors that she was paying a former janitor's salary to facilitate playdates, and most troubling of all, what would happen when word of this arrangement inevitably leaked to the media and the public? These concerns crystallized into actual worry when her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Victoria Chen from Page 6 has been calling. Says she has questions about unconventional therapeutic approaches for Eva. Should I schedule a call? Malina's blood ran cold. Victoria Chen was known for her particularly vicious society gossip columns, and her interest in Eva's therapy could only mean one thing: someone had talked. She looked around the garden, suddenly aware of how exposed they were, how easily a photographer with a telephoto lens could capture images of the billionaire CEO allowing her special needs daughter to play with a working-class child. Lucas, she said quietly, not wanting to alarm the girls, who were now collaborating on a watercolor painting of the fountain. We need to be careful. There might be media interest in this situation. Lucas's expression grew serious. What kind of media interest? The kind that turns private families into public entertainment. The kind that asks intrusive questions about why a pharmaceutical heiress is seeking advice from a maintenance worker. She watched Lucas process this information, saw the moment when he understood the full implications of their arrangement. In his world, media attention meant invasion of privacy and potential danger to his daughter. In her world, it meant potential damage to carefully constructed images and billion-dollar business interests. Maybe we should call this experiment off, Lucas said quietly. I don't want Becca exposed to that kind of scrutiny. But before Malina could respond, Eva's voice cut through their whispered conversation. Mama, look what Becca taught me. They turned to see Eva holding up a painting that took Malina's breath away. Instead of her usual careful representational drawings, Eva had created something abstract and emotional, swirls of blue and silver that somehow captured the essence of the fountain's music. It was the kind of artistic expression that all of Eva's art therapy sessions had been trying to unlock, achieved effortlessly in the context of friendship and understanding. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Malina said, and meant it. The painting was more than beautiful. It was evidence of Eva's growth, proof that she was capable of expressing herself in ways that transcended traditional therapeutic goals. "Becca says I'm a synesthesia artist," Eva announced proudly. "She says that means I paint with all my senses, not just my eyes." Malina looked at the painting again, then at her daughter's radiant face, then at Becca's shy smile of pride in her new friend's achievement. The weight of the decision she faced settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. She could protect Eva from media attention by ending this friendship, maintaining the careful boundaries that separated their world from Lucas's. Or she could fight for something that was clearly precious to her daughter, even if it meant exposing them both to scrutiny and judgment. The choice became clear when she saw Eva reach over and squeeze Becca's hand, a gesture of physical affection that Eva rarely initiated with anyone, including her own mother. "Lucas," she said firmly, "we're not calling anything off, but we are going to be smarter about how we handle this." Over the next week, Malina threw herself into damage control with the same intensity she brought to corporate crises. She hired a private security firm to conduct sweep checks for photographers, arranged for their meetings to take place in more private locations, and had her legal team prepare injunctions against any unauthorized photography of Eva. She also made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She gave an exclusive interview to a respected journalist from The Atlantic, controlling the narrative before tabloids could distort it. The article, titled "Rethinking Intervention: One Family's Journey Beyond Traditional Therapy," presented their story as a thoughtful exploration of alternative approaches to supporting neurodivergent children. Malina spoke candidly about Eva's struggles, her own journey as a parent, and the unexpected wisdom she'd found in Lucas's approach. The piece was balanced and respectful, focusing on the children's growth rather than the unusual circumstances of their friendship. But even carefully managed media attention came with consequences. Within days of the article's publication, Malina found herself fielding calls from board members, investors, and business associates who questioned her judgment. The most difficult conversation came from her own mother, Malina Ward, who arrived at the townhouse unannounced on a Thursday evening with the kind of steely determination that had built the family fortune. "Malina, we need to talk," Catherine said, settling into the living room with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This situation with Eva has gone too far." Malina poured tea for both of them, buying time to prepare for a conversation she'd been dreading. At 73, Catherine remained formidable, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and utterly convinced that problems could be solved through the application of sufficient resources and strategic thinking. "If you're referring to Eva's friendship with Becca, I don't see how that's gone anywhere except in a positive direction." "I'm referring to the spectacle you've created," Catherine said crisply. "Hiring a janitor as a consultant, allowing our family's private business to be discussed in magazine articles, encouraging Eva's peculiarities instead of seeking proper treatment. Her peculiarities, as you call them, are part of who she is, and the treatment she's receiving from Lucas has helped her more in 3 months than traditional therapy has in 3 years. Catherine's expression hardened. "Lucas, you're on a first-name basis with the help now." The dismissive tone sparked something fierce in Malina's chest. "He's not the help, Mother. He's someone who understands Eva in a way that our expensive specialists never have. He's helped her develop confident social connections and creative expression that he's helped her become more autistic," Catherine interrupted, "more withdrawn from the real world. Malina, I've been patient with your maternal instincts, but this has become a business liability. The board is concerned about your judgment. Investors are questioning your priorities, and frankly, so am I." Malina set down her teacup with careful control. "Eva is my daughter, my priority, not the board's concern or the investor's opinion. Ava is also the heir to a pharmaceutical empire. Her behavior reflects on our family name, our business interests, and the thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on our success. You cannot afford to indulge her disabilities at the expense of preparing her for the responsibilities she'll inherit. The word indulge hit Malina like a physical blow. She thought about Eva's radiant smile when she'd created her first synesthesia painting, about the careful way she and Becca had shared their safe spaces, about the growing confidence that came from being accepted exactly as she was. "I'm not indulging her disabilities," Malina said quietly. "I'm honoring her differences. There's a distinction. A distinction that will cost you everything if you're not careful," Catherine warned. "I've already had 3 board members suggest that your emotional attachment to Eva is compromising your business judgment. If this continues, they might question your fitness to lead the company." The threat hung in the air between them like a poison cloud. Malina understood the subtext: continue down this path, and Catherine would support a motion to remove her as CEO. The family business that had consumed her entire adult life, the empire she'd built on innovation and strategic thinking, could be taken away if she chose her daughter's well-being over corporate expectations. "And if I end Eva's friendship with Becca, if I put her back in intensive behavioral modification therapy, will that satisfy the board?" Catherine's expression softened slightly, revealing the grandmother beneath the corporate strategist. "Malina, I'm not asking you to sacrifice Eva's happiness. I'm asking you to be realistic about her limitations and plan accordingly. There are excellent residential facilities where she could receive appropriate care while you focus on running the company. She would be safe, well cared for, and hidden away so she doesn't embarrass the family name," Malina finished. "Mother Ava isn't a problem to be managed. She's a child who deserves to be loved and accepted for who she is." "Love and acceptance don't prepare someone for leadership," Catherine said firmly. "Ava will never be capable of running this company. The sooner you accept that and plan for succession accordingly, the better for everyone involved." After Catherine left, Malina sat alone in her living room staring at one of Eva's synesthesia paintings that now hung prominently on the wall. The piece showed their townhouse rendered in emotional colors rather than realistic hues: warm golds for the kitchen, where they ate breakfast together, deep blues for Ava's reading nook, bright yellows for the music room, where Eva had recently started piano lessons, with a teacher who appreciated her unique relationship with sound. The painting was evidence of Eva's extraordinary way of seeing the world, but it was also a reminder of how far they'd traveled from conventional expectations. 6 months ago, Malina had been grooming Eva for a future that looked like a scaled-down version of her own private school's elite university's preparation for corporate leadership. Now she was watching her daughter bloom into someone entirely different: an artist, a synesthete, a child who experienced the world in ways that traditional success metrics couldn't measure. The choice Catherine had presented was stark but clear: sacrifice Eva's authentic development for corporate approval or risk everything on the belief that love and acceptance were more valuable than conventional achievement. As Malina climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping daughter, she found Eva's door slightly ajar, soft light spilling into the hallway from her reading nook. Eva was awake, sitting in her blue-lit sanctuary, with a sketchbook drawing by the gentle illumination that made everything feel underwater and peaceful. She looked up when she sensed her mother's presence, her face serene in a way that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. "Hi, Mama. I was drawing tomorrow." "Drawing tomorrow? Becca's coming over and we're going to make art in the garden. I wanted to draw what I think it will feel like, all peaceful green with sparkles of friendship yellow." Malina sat down beside her daughter in the cozy space that had become Eva's refuge. "Sweetheart, What if some people think your friendship with Becca is unusual? Ava considered this with the seriousness she brought to all questions. Unusual how, well, some people might think that children from different backgrounds shouldn't be friends, that families like ours should only associate with families like ours. That's silly, Eva said matter-of-factly. Becca understands about colors and feelings. Most fancy people don't understand about those things at all. Why would I want to be friends with people who don't understand the important stuff? Her simple logic cut through all of Malina's complex corporate considerations like a knife through tissue paper. Eva wasn't concerned about social status or business implications or family legacy. She was concerned about connection, understanding, and the joy of being accepted for who she was. "You're right," Malina said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Becca does understand the important stuff." "Mama, are you worried about something?" Malina looked at her daughter's trusting face illuminated by the blue lights that made her feel safe in a world that often felt too bright and too loud. The weight of the decision she faced seemed enormous, but Eva's presence made it simple. "I was worried," she admitted, "but not anymore." That night, Malina made calls that would reshape both their lives irrevocably. She resigned from 3 corporate boards, restructured her involvement in daily business operations, and began the process of setting up a trust that would ensure Eva's future security regardless of what happened to the family company. If choosing her daughter's well-being over corporate expectations meant losing everything else, she was prepared to make that trade. But first, she had one more call to make. "Lucas, it's Malina. I know it's late, but I wanted to ask you something. What would you think about making this arrangement more permanent? Not just play dates and art sessions, but something more comprehensive. A partnership in helping both girls develop their gifts while learning to navigate the world." There was a long pause before Lucas responded. "Are you sure? The media attention, the pressure from your business associates, it's only going to get more intense." Malina looked at Ava's synesthesia painting hanging on her wall, at the evidence of her daughter's extraordinary perception rendered in colors that spoke of safety and acceptance and love. "I'm sure. Eva needs what you and Becca have given her, and frankly, I think I need it too." "What are you proposing exactly?" "I'm proposing that we stop hiding and start building something real. A space where both girls can be themselves without apology. A place where different doesn't mean deficient, where extraordinary perception is valued rather than corrected." "That sounds like more than friendship playdates." "It is more than that," Malina agreed. "It's a foundation for everything else, and I think it's time to make it official." As she hung up the phone, Malina felt the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of a cliff about to jump into unknown territory. But this time, instead of being driven by corporate ambition or strategic planning, she was motivated by something much simpler and infinitely more powerful, the love of a mother who had finally learned to see her daughter's differences as gifts rather than deficits. The storm was coming. Catherine's warnings about board displeasure and investor concerns would prove prophetic. Media attention would intensify, bringing both supporters and critics who questioned her judgment, her priorities, and her fitness to lead a major corporation. But for the first time in Eva's life, Malina felt ready to weather whatever challenges arose because she was no longer fighting alone. She had Lucas's wisdom, Becca's friendship, and most importantly, she had Eva's trust that had been earned not through fixing or changing her daughter, but through learning to see the world through her remarkable eyes. The real test was still to come, but Malina Ward, pharmaceutical heiress, corporate leader, and most importantly mother, was finally ready to fight for what mattered most. The storm arrived on a Wednesday morning in the form of a legal document delivered by courier to Malina's office at 6:47 a.m. The letterhead bore the name of Whitmore, Chase and Associates, the same firm that had handled her divorce, and more ominously, the same firm that represented her ex-husband, David Kellerman. Malina's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, though whether from caffeine or premonition, she couldn't say. The petition for emergency custody modification was 23 pages of legal precision, each paragraph a carefully crafted missile aimed at the life she'd been building with Eva over the past 6 months. David was seeking full custody, citing the mother's recent erratic behavior, questionable judgment in therapeutic choices, and failure to provide appropriate educational and medical intervention for the minor child's documented disabilities. Attached were photographs, paparazzi shots of Eva and Becca in Central Park, images of Lucas entering and leaving the townhouse, screenshots of social media posts criticizing Malina's unconventional parenting choices. The documentation was thorough, professional, and devastating in its implications. David hadn't been in Eva's life for more than supervised visits twice a month for the past 3 years. But now he was positioning himself as the concerned father, protecting his daughter from her mother's increasingly unstable decisions. Malina's intercom buzzed. "Ms. Ward, your attorney is on line 1. He says it's urgent." James Morrison had been her lawyer for 12 years, guiding her through corporate acquisitions, divorce proceedings, and the complex legal landscape of pharmaceutical development. His voice carried the weight of bad news delivered to powerful clients who weren't accustomed to losing. "Malina, I've reviewed the petition. It's serious. David's team has built a compelling case that your recent choices constitute a material change in circumstances that could be detrimental to Eva's well-being. Based on what Eva is thriving, she's happier than she's been in years. Based on documented evidence that you've rejected conventional medical treatment in favor of unproven methods administered by unqualified personnel. Based on media reports suggesting you've prioritized your daughter's friendship with another disabled child over her access to appropriate educational opportunities. Based on concerns that your emotional state has become compromised to the point where you're making decisions that serve your psychological needs rather than Eva's best interests." Each point hit like a physical blow. Malina sank into her chair, the weight of the legal language translating into a simple, terrifying reality. Everything she'd done to help Eva could be used against her in court. "What's their timeline?" "Emergency hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. That gives us 6 days to prepare our defense." "And what would that defense look like?" James was quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that preceded difficult truths. "Honestly, it would look like agreeing to put Eva back in conventional therapy, severing the relationship with Lucas Hale, and demonstrating to the court that you're willing to prioritize established medical and educational protocols over personal preferences." The suggestion felt like a betrayal of everything Eva had accomplished, everything they'd built together. "And if I refuse, then we go to trial with a case that's much harder to win. Judges tend to side with conventional medical wisdom, especially when the alternative appears to be based on emotional rather than scientific reasoning." After hanging up, Malina sat alone in her office, surrounded by the symbols of her success awards, framed articles, photos of groundbreaking moments in pharmaceutical development. None of it felt relevant to the battle she was facing. For the first time in her adult life, her wealth and influence felt inadequate to protect what mattered most. Her phone rang again. This time it was Lucas, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Malina, I just got served with a subpoena. David's lawyers want to depose me about my relationship with Eva, my qualifications, my background. They're also requesting Becca's medical records. They can't have Becca's records. She's not part of this case. Tell that to the lawyer who just informed me that my daughter's autism diagnosis is relevant to determining whether I'm a suitable influence on Eva. Apparently, they're arguing that I'm encouraging Eva's maladaptive behaviors because I don't see autism as something that needs to be cured. Malina felt rage building in her chest, not the cold, strategic anger that served her in business, but something hotter and more protective. Lucas, I'm sorry. This is my fault. My choices have put you and Becca in danger. Don't apologize, Lucas said firmly. I knew this was a possibility when I agreed to help. But I need to know, are you going to fight this? Or are you going to give them what they want to protect your custody? The question cut to the heart of everything. Fighting meant risking Eva's future on an uncertain legal outcome. Surrendering meant destroying everything Eva had gained, but ensuring she remained in Malina's custody under court-approved conditions. I need to talk to Eva, Malina said finally. Before I make any decisions, I need to understand what she wants. That afternoon, Malina left work early and found Eva in her reading nook working on a project that made her breath catch. Eva had created what she called a friendship map, a complex diagram that charted the connections between herself, Becca, Lucas, and Malina using colors and symbols that represented different types of emotional bonds. Blue lines connected the spaces where Eva felt safe. Yellow lines showed moments of shared joy, and green lines mapped understanding and acceptance. Hi, Mama. Look what I made. Malina settled beside her daughter in the blue-lit space, studying the intricate web of relationships that Eva had rendered visible. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can you tell me about it? This is us, Eva said, pointing to the center of the diagram, where 4 figures stood, connected by multiple colored lines. See how we're all different colors, but the lines connect us. That means we're family, but not the kind of family that some people understand. What do you mean? Eva traced one of the blue lines with her finger. Regular families have people who look the same and think the same and feel the same. But we're a different kind of family. We have people who understand about colors and sounds and feelings that don't have words yet. Malina felt tears threatening as she realized that Eva had articulated something she'd been struggling to understand herself. They had become a family not through blood or marriage or legal documents, but through the deeper bonds of understanding and acceptance. Eva, what if someone told you that you had to choose between this family and your other family, your father's family? Eva's expression grew serious the way it did when she was processing complex emotional information. What would happen to Becca if I chose Daddy's family? Becca would be fine. She and Lucas would continue their life just without us in it. And what would happen to you? Malina chose her words carefully, not wanting to burden Eva with adult complexities, but needing her daughter to understand the stakes. I would be very sad. But I would still be your mama, and I would still love you exactly as you are. Eva studied her friendship map for a long moment, her small fingers tracing the colored connections between the 4 figures at its center. Mama, why would someone want to break apart a family that works? The question was asked with the kind of clarity that children bring to adult complications, cutting through legal strategies and custody arguments to the essential truth underneath. Why would anyone want to destroy something that was helping Eva thrive? Sometimes people think they know what's best for someone else even when that person is happy with their own choices. That's not very smart, Eva observed. If I was happy living underwater and someone tried to make me live in the desert because they thought land was better than water, I would be very sad and probably die. The metaphor was so perfectly Eva complex visual and absolutely accurate that Malina had to fight back a sob. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. That wouldn't be very smart at all. That evening after Eva had gone to bed, Malina made a decision that would have shocked her business associates and terrified her legal team. Instead of strategizing about court appearances and expert witnesses, she called an emergency meeting with the most important people in Eva's life, Lucas Becca and Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist, who had been present during that first bubble night 6 months earlier. They gathered in Malina's living room at 8 o'clock, an unlikely council of war surrounding Eva's friendship map, which she had insisted on displaying prominently on the coffee table. Dr. Chen had brought her clinical notes from the past 6 months, documenting Eva's remarkable progress. Lucas had brought Becca, who was clutching a painting she'd created specifically for this meeting. "I want to show the court what Eva has accomplished," Malina began. "But I need to understand exactly what we're defending. Dr. Chen, from a clinical perspective, how would you characterize Eva's development over the past 6 months?" Dr. Chen opened her notes, but her expression was troubled. "Malina, I need to be honest with you. From a traditional therapeutic standpoint, Eva's progress is extraordinary. Her emotional regulation has improved dramatically, her social engagement has expanded significantly, and her creative expression has flourished in ways I've never seen before. But it's not the kind of progress that courts typically recognize," Malina finished. "Exactly. The metrics that legal systems understand are things like IQ improvements, reduction in stimming behaviors, increased eye contact, better compliance with social norms. Eva's growth has been in areas that are harder to quantify: self-acceptance, authentic self-expression, genuine friendship formation." Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What you're saying is that helping Eva become more autistic, not less autistic, doesn't count as progress in the legal system." "I'm saying that helping Eva become more authentically herself, regardless of how that aligns with neurotypical expectations, is seen as therapeutic failure rather than success." Becca, who had been quietly listening to this adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Can I show you something?" She unrolled the painting she'd brought, a portrait of Eva, but rendered in Becca's unique style that captured emotional essence rather than physical appearance. The Eva in the painting was surrounded by swirls of blue and yellow and green, her face radiant with contentment, her hands raised as if conducting an orchestra of colors and sounds that only she could perceive. "This is Eva before she was sad," Becca explained. "Eva when she feels safe and understood and happy. If the court people make her go back to the old way, she'll turn gray and small again." The simplicity of Becca's observation cut through all the adult complexities surrounding the custody battle. The question wasn't whether Eva's progress could be measured by conventional standards. The question was whether a 9-year-old child should be forced to diminish herself to satisfy other people's expectations of normalcy. "There's something else we need to consider," Lucas said quietly. "David's petition includes a request to have Eva evaluated by Dr. Harrison Whitman." Malina's blood ran cold. Dr. Whitman was the neurologist who had recommended residential treatment, the one whose intensive behavioral modification program would have focused on eliminating exactly the traits that made Eva uniquely herself. If Dr. Whitman evaluates Eva and recommends his residential program, the court will likely view that as expert medical opinion trumping our unconventional approach, Dr. Chen said. And given Eva's current level of authentic self-expression, she would likely present as more severely autistic than she did 6 months ago, when she was masking her true responses to fit therapeutic goals. The cruel irony was clear: Eva's growth into authentic selfhood would be used as evidence that she needed more intensive intervention to suppress that same authenticity. "So we're trapped," Malina said. "If we've helped Eva become more herself, the court will see that as failure. If we try to go back to making her mask her autism, we'll destroy everything she's gained." "Not necessarily," Lucas said slowly. What if we don't try to defend Ava's progress by conventional standards? What if we change the conversation entirely? What do you mean? Lucas looked at Eva's friendship map, at Becca's painting, at the evidence of creative collaboration and emotional growth that filled Malina's living room. What if we argue that the real question isn't whether Eva is becoming more or less autistic, but whether she's becoming happier, more connected, and more confident? What if we demonstrate that conventional success metrics are inadequate for measuring the kind of progress that actually matters? Dr. Chen leaned forward, her clinical mind engaging with the possibility. You're talking about reframing the entire custody argument. Instead of defending alternative therapy choices, we'd be challenging the fundamental assumptions about what constitutes appropriate care for neurodivergent children. Exactly. We'd be arguing that David's petition represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what Eva needs to thrive. Malina felt something shift in her thinking, the same strategic clarity that had served her in the business world, now focusing on the most important case of her life. We wouldn't just be defending our choices. We'd be advocating for a completely different approach to supporting neurodivergent children. But that's incredibly risky, Dr. Chen warned. You'd be asking a family court judge to reject established medical protocols in favor of a philosophy that most people don't understand. If you lose everything. And if you win, you establish legal precedent that could change how custody cases involving neurodivergent children are decided. You'd be fighting not just for Eva, but for every child whose authentic self doesn't match conventional expectations of progress. The weight of that possibility settled on the room like a physical presence. They weren't just facing a custody battle anymore. They were potentially fighting for the right of neurodivergent children to be accepted and supported as they were, rather than forced to conform to neurotypical standards of normalcy. Becca, who had been creating a small sketch while the adults talked, suddenly looked up. Will Eva have to go live with the mean daddy? We're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen, Malina said, though the promise felt fragile against the legal forces arrayed against them. Good, Becca said firmly. Because Eva and I are building something important, and it's not finished yet. What are you building? Becca and Eva exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and collaborative dreams. A place where kids like us can be ourselves without anyone trying to fix us. A place where seeing colors in music and hearing feelings in sounds is normal. A place where different is good instead of wrong. The adults fell silent, struck by the profound simplicity of the children's vision. They were imagining a world where neurodivergent children could exist without apology, where their unique perceptions were valued rather than corrected, where difference was celebrated rather than pathologized. Maybe that's our defense, Malina said slowly. Maybe we don't just argue that Eva is happy and healthy as she is. Maybe we demonstrate what's possible when neurodivergent children are truly accepted and supported. How would we do that? Malina looked around the room at the evidence of transformation that surrounded them. Eva's friendship map, Becca's empathetic artwork, Dr. Chen's clinical notes, documenting remarkable progress, Lucas's quiet wisdom that had started it all. An idea began forming, audacious and risky and potentially brilliant. We create what Becca and Eva are imagining. We build the place they're dreaming about. Not someday, not after the custody battle is over, but now, before the hearing. We show the court not just that Eva is thriving, but that our approach could help other children thrive too. You're talking about starting a school, Dr. Chen said slowly. I'm talking about creating a demonstration of what's possible when we stop trying to fix neurodivergent children and start building environments where they can flourish as they are. Lucas looked skeptical. In 6 days, Malina, that's impossible. Not a full school, but a proof of concept. A space where Eva and Becca, and maybe a few other children, can show what authentic learning and growth look like when they're not being forced to suppress their natural ways of processing the world. The idea was taking shape as she spoke, fed by the same visionary thinking that had built her pharmaceutical empire. We document everything. We bring in educational experts who understand neurodiversity. We create a learning environment that honors different ways of thinking and perceiving. And we invite the court to see Eva in context, not as a child who needs to be fixed, but as a child who needs to be understood. It's incredibly ambitious, Dr. Chen said, and incredibly risky. If it doesn't work, if Eva struggles in that environment, it could actually support David's case that she needs more structured intervention. And if it does work, if it works, you demonstrate that there are alternatives to conventional approaches that produce better outcomes for some children. You show that Eva's progress isn't an accident or an anomaly, but the result of an intentionally different philosophy of care. Malina looked at Eva's friendship map again, at the colored lines connecting people who had found each other across differences of class and experience and neurotype. They had 6 days to build something that could protect not just Eva's future, but the futures of children like her everywhere. Lucas, what do you think? Is this completely insane? Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Becca to the artwork covering Malina's walls, to the evidence of his daughter's flourishing friendship with Eva. I think, he said finally, that insane might be exactly what this situation requires. Eva and Becca have been trying to show us something important. Maybe it's time we started listening. Dr. Chen, I think you're proposing to turn a custody battle into a civil rights case, she said slowly. I think you're risking everything on the possibility that one family court judge will be willing to see neurodivergent children as fully human rather than problems to be solved. Is that a yes or a no? Dr. Chen smiled, the first genuine smile Malina had seen from her since the legal documents had arrived. It's a yes. If we're going to fight, let's fight for something bigger than just one family. Let's fight for all the children who've been told they need to be someone else in order to be acceptable. And so, in a living room filled with artwork that celebrated difference and friendship maps that charted new ways of being family, an unlikely group of people made a decision that would either transform their lives or destroy them. They would spend the next 6 days building a demonstration of what the world could look like if neurodivergent children were truly valued for who they were, rather than judged for who they couldn't become. The custody hearing would determine Eva's future, but the proof of concept they were about to create might determine the future for countless other children whose minds worked differently, whose hearts beat to rhythms that conventional wisdom couldn't hear, whose gifts remained invisible to eyes that had been trained to see only deficits. Outside the city hummed with the energy of 8 million people living separate lives, each convinced that their way of seeing the world was the only way that mattered. But inside Malina's townhouse, a small group of people was about to prove that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simple decision to see the world through someone else's extraordinary eyes. The battle for Eva's future was about to become something much larger, a fight for the right of all children to exist authentically in a world that too often demanded conformity as the price of acceptance. And at the center of it all were 2 9-year-old girls who had never doubted that their friendship was worth fighting for, who had never questioned that different could be beautiful, who had never stopped believing that the world they were imagining together was not just possible but necessary. The real work was just beginning. 6 days to build a revolution was impossible by any rational measure, but Malina Ward had not built a pharmaceutical empire by accepting rational limitations. By Thursday morning, she had transformed the entire 3rd floor of Ward Core Tower into what she privately called the Possibility Project, a learning space designed around the principle that neurodivergent children didn't need to be fixed, they needed to be understood. The transformation was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. Walls had been removed to create flowing spaces that could accommodate different sensory needs. Lighting systems allowed for individual control of brightness and color temperature. Sound dampening materials created quiet zones, while open areas welcomed the kind of collaborative noise that happened when children felt safe to express themselves authentically. Art supplies, musical instruments, building materials, and technology were arranged in intuitive clusters that invited exploration rather than demanding compliance. Lucas had taken a leave of absence from his maintenance job to serve as lead consultant, and his understanding of how spaces could support or hinder neurodivergent children was evident in every detail. There were retreat areas for when stimulation became overwhelming movement zones, for children who thought better while moving, and collaborative spaces designed for the kind of parallel play that often preceded deeper friendships. Dr. Chen had recruited 3 colleagues who specialized in neurodiversity-affirming approaches. Dr. Patricia Williams, an occupational therapist who focused on sensory integration. Dr. Michael Santos, an educational psychologist who had written extensively about alternative learning styles. And Dr. Jennifer Liu, a developmental pediatrician who advocated for acceptance-based rather than compliance-based interventions. But the real magic happened when the children arrived. Iva and Becca were joined by 6 other children whose parents had heard about the project through professional networks and desperate online searches for alternatives to conventional approaches. There was Marcus, a 10-year-old, who saw mathematical patterns in everything, but struggled with traditional arithmetic. Sophie, an 8-year-old, whose hyperlexia meant she could read at a college level but couldn't tie her shoes. James, a 9-year-old, who communicated through complex drawings rather than spoken words. Luna, a 7-year-old whose synesthesia was so pronounced that she experienced physical pain from certain color combinations. Alex, an 11-year-old, whose autism presented as extreme social anxiety, but whose understanding of animal behavior was extraordinary. And Kai, a 6-year-old, whose echolalia had been dismissed as meaningless repetition until someone realized he was creating complex sound poems. The first morning was chaos. 8 neurodivergent children in a new space with unfamiliar adults created a sensory storm of anxiety, excitement, overstimulation, and shutdown responses. But instead of trying to control or redirect the chaos, the adults simply held space for it, trusting that the children would find their equilibrium if given permission to do so authentically. Eva found Marcus sitting in a corner, overwhelmed by the volume of new stimuli, and quietly began showing him her friendship map. The visual representation of emotional connections seemed to calm him, and soon he was creating his own version, mapping the mathematical relationships he perceived between the people and spaces around him. Becca discovered Luna crying in one of the quiet spaces, distressed by the fluorescent lighting in the main area. Together, they figured out how to adjust the color temperature to something that felt soft purple instead of angry yellow. And Luna's tears transformed into wonder as she experienced lighting that actually supported her sensory needs. Sophie and James found each other through their shared love of complex narratives, Sophie reading aloud from advanced texts while James illustrated the stories with intricate drawings that captured emotional subtleties that words couldn't convey. By the second day, something remarkable was happening. The children weren't just coexisting. They were collaborating in ways that none of the adults had anticipated. Eva and Marcus discovered that they could combine her color-sound synesthesia with his pattern recognition to create what they called mathematical music compositions that were both arithmetically precise and emotionally evocative. Becca and Alex developed a communication system that honored Alex's difficulty with verbal interaction while leveraging his deep understanding of non-human behavior. They created elaborate scenarios using toy animals to explore social dynamics and emotional regulation, with Alex providing insights about animal behavior that helped other children understand their own responses to stress and stimulation. Luna and Kai discovered that they could create feeling symphonies, collaborative pieces, where Luna's visual synesthesia guided Kai's echolalic compositions, resulting in sound color experiences that were both beautiful and meaningful. The adults documented everything, not just academic progress or behavioral compliance, but moments of genuine connection, creative breakthrough, and authentic self-expression. They recorded conversations where children explained their thought processes, captured videos of collaborative problem-solving, and photographed artwork that revealed the sophisticated inner worlds that conventional assessments often missed. On Friday, 2 days before the custody hearing, something unprecedented happened. Sophie, who had never spoken directly to an adult outside her immediate family, approached Dr. Chen with a question that would fundamentally change how the project was understood. "Dr. Chen, why do people think we're broken?" The question was delivered with Sophie's characteristic directness, her 8-year-old voice carrying the weight of accumulated experiences with adults who had tried to fix, modify, or normalize her way of being in the world. "What makes you think people see you as broken, Sophie?" "Because they keep trying to change us. They want Marcus to stop seeing patterns everywhere. They want Eva to stop hearing colors. They want me to care about age-appropriate books instead of the ones that actually interest me. They want all of us to be smaller and quieter and more normal." Dr. Chen knelt down to Sophie's eye level, recognizing that this conversation was being observed by every other child in the space. Her response would either validate their experiences of being misunderstood or become another instance of adult dismissal. "I think," Dr. Chen said carefully, "that some people are scared of things they don't understand, and instead of learning about those things, they try to make them more familiar." "But we're not scary," Becca said, joining the conversation. "We're just different." "You're absolutely right. You're not scary at all. You're extraordinary." Marcus looked up from the mathematical sculpture he was creating with Eva. "Extraordinary means really good, different, not really bad, different." "That's exactly what it means." James, who rarely spoke but was listening intently, suddenly said, "What if the adults learned our languages instead of making us learn theirs?" The suggestion hung in the air like a revelation. What if instead of training neurodivergent children to mimic neurotypical behaviors, adults learned to understand and communicate in the natural languages of pattern recognition, synesthetic perception, hyperlexic analysis, and sensory-emotional expression? That afternoon, the children began teaching the adults. Eva explained how colors carried emotional information that could guide social interactions. Marcus demonstrated how mathematical patterns could predict and manage sensory overwhelm. Sophie showed how advanced reading comprehension could be used to understand complex social dynamics that age-typical materials couldn't address. The learning was bidirectional and profound. Adults gained insight into cognitive processes they had never considered, while children experienced the validation of being seen as teachers rather than problems to be solved. Dr. Williams was particularly moved by Alex's explanation of why certain environments felt predatory, while others felt safe, drawing on his understanding of animal behavior to articulate sensory experiences that traditional assessments couldn't capture. Alex has developed a sophisticated framework for understanding environmental safety that most adults never achieve, she told Malina. He's not failing to understand social cues, he's reading environmental information that the rest of us miss entirely. By Saturday, the day before the custody hearing, the Possibility Project had become something none of them had anticipated. It wasn't just a demonstration of alternative educational approaches. It was proof of concept for an entirely different way of understanding neurodivergent children. The documentation they had gathered told a story that conventional assessments couldn't capture. Every child had demonstrated growth, but not the kind of growth that traditional metrics measured. They had grown in confidence, creativity, authentic self-expression, and meaningful connection with others. They had learned to advocate for their needs, collaborate despite different communication styles, and support each other through sensory difficulties and emotional challenges. Most importantly, they had learned to see their neurological differences as sources of strength rather than deficits to be overcome. That evening, as Malina reviewed the evidence they would present in court, she received an unexpected phone call. It was Dr. Harrison Whitman, the neurologist, whose residential program David's legal team was promoting as the appropriate intervention for Eva. "Ms. Ward, I understand you've been running some kind of experimental program with autistic children." "Dr. Whitman, yes, we've been exploring alternative approaches to supporting neurodivergent children. I'd like to see it." The request caught Malina off guard. "I'm not sure that's appropriate given that you're scheduled to evaluate Eva for the court." "That's exactly why it's appropriate. If I'm going to make recommendations about Eva's care, I should understand all the options being considered." Malina hesitated, knowing that Dr. Whitman's assessment could determine the outcome of the custody hearing. But she also knew that the Possibility Project spoke for itself. "Would you be available tomorrow morning before the hearing? I'll be there at 9. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Malina's emotional state as she prepared for what would either be a vindication of everything they had built or its complete destruction. The children had decided they wanted to be present for Dr. Whitman's visit, not as subjects to be evaluated, but as ambassadors for their own experience. When Dr. Whitman arrived, accompanied by a court-appointed child advocate and a family services investigator, the space was alive with the kind of purposeful activity that happened when children felt safe to pursue their interests authentically. Eva and Marcus were working on their latest mathematical music composition, using colored blocks to represent both numerical relationships and synesthetic sound-color correspondences. Becca and Luna were creating what they called an empathy painting, a collaborative artwork that translated different emotional states into visual representations that could help other children identify and communicate their feelings. Sophie was reading to James from a graduate-level text on animal cognition, while he illustrated the concepts in real time, their partnership, demonstrating how hyperlexia and visual processing could combine to achieve understanding that neither could reach alone. Alex and Kai were in one of the movement spaces working together to create a sensory story that used Kai's echolalic patterns and Alex's understanding of nonverbal communication to explore themes of belonging and acceptance. Dr. Whitman moved through the space with professional detachment, making notes and asking questions that revealed his clinical training. But as the morning progressed, something in his expression began to shift. "Eva," he said, approaching the spot where she was working with Marcus. "Can you tell me about what you're creating?" Eva looked up from her color block composition, her face serious but unafraid. "We're making music that teaches people about feelings and numbers at the same time. See, the blue blocks are sad numbers like 3, because 3 feels lonely, and the yellow blocks are happy numbers like 8, because 8 feels complete. And how do you know what numbers feel like? The same way you know what words feel like. They just do. Marcus sees the patterns in the feelings, and I hear the colors in the patterns. And together, we can make something that helps other people understand what we understand." Dr. Whitman made more notes, then turned to Marcus. "And what patterns do you see in Eva's synesthesia?" Marcus's response was immediate and confident. "Eva's color-sound correspondences follow a mathematical sequence based on frequency relationships. When she says that 3 feels lonely, she's actually describing a harmonic isolation that occurs when you try to divide frequencies that don't have clean mathematical relationships. When she says 8 feels complete, she's identifying the octave relationship that creates harmonic resolution. The sophistication of Marcus's analysis clearly surprised Dr. Whitman. "How old are you, Marcus?" 10. But age doesn't determine understanding capacity. Eva taught me that. She says people think in different kinds of time, and chronological time is just one kind. Whitman spent the next hour moving through the space, observing interactions and asking questions that grew increasingly thoughtful rather than evaluative. He watched Sophie explain complex emotional dynamics to adults, using vocabulary that most college students hadn't mastered. He observed James create visual narratives that captured psychological subtleties that verbal assessments often missed. He listened as Luna described her synesthetic experiences with a precision that revealed sophisticated sensory processing rather than disordered perception. But it was his conversation with Becca that seemed to affect him most profoundly. "Becca, I understand you and Eva are best friends. What makes your friendship special?" Becca considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important topics. "Eva and I both used to think we were broken because we saw things differently than other people. But then we met each other and realized we weren't broken. We were just using parts of our brains that other people don't use very much." "And what parts are those?" "The parts that notice feelings in colors and patterns in numbers and stories in movements. The parts that remember everything and care about details and want to understand how things really work, instead of just pretending to understand." "Do you think all children should learn the way you and Eva learn?" "No," Becca said immediately. "Other kids learn in other ways, and that's good too. But we should all be allowed to learn in the ways that work for our brains, instead of having to pretend our brains work like everyone else's." Dr. Whitman made extensive notes during this conversation, his expression thoughtful, in a way that gave Malina cautious hope. When the observation period ended, Dr. Whitman asked to speak privately with the adult team. His first question surprised everyone. "How long did it take you to achieve these results?" 6 days, Dr. Chen replied. 6 days. Dr. Whitman repeated his tone, suggesting he was recalculating assumptions he had held for decades. "In 6 days, you've achieved levels of authentic self-expression, peer collaboration, and creative confidence that most traditional programs struggle to develop over months or years." "The difference," Lucas said quietly, "is that we started from acceptance rather than deficit. We assumed these children were already whole and worked to create environments that honored their wholeness." Dr. Whitman was quiet for a long moment, reviewing his notes and clearly wrestling with implications that challenged his professional training. "I need to ask you directly, do you believe these children require intensive behavioral intervention to function in society?" "We believe these children require intensive environmental modification so that society can function with them," Dr. Santos replied. "The problem isn't that they can't adapt to our world. The problem is that our world hasn't been designed to accommodate their ways of thinking and perceiving." "And Eva specifically, do you believe she needs residential treatment to develop appropriate social and academic skills?" Malina found her voice, knowing that this moment would determine everything. "Dr. Whitman, Eva needs what every child needs to be loved, understood, and supported in developing her authentic potential. The question isn't whether she can learn to mimic neurotypical behaviors. The question is whether she should have to." At 2 p.m. they gathered in Family Court Part 15, a sterile room that would determine Eva's future based on competing visions of what that future should look like. David sat with his legal team, projecting the kind of concerned paternal authority that played well in family court. His lawyer had prepared a case built on conventional wisdom, expert medical opinion, and societal expectations of appropriate intervention for disabled children. Malina's team presented a more complex picture. They had Eva's artwork documentation of her progress testimony from educational experts, and most importantly, they had Dr. Whitman's evaluation, which had arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes before the hearing began. Judge Patricia Morrison was known for her methodical approach to custody cases and her preference for established protocols over experimental approaches. As she reviewed the competing petitions, her expression revealed nothing about her thinking. David's attorney presented first, building a case around stability, conventional medical wisdom, and the importance of preparing Eva for adult independence through intensive behavioral modification. Your Honor, the mother's well-intentioned but misguided attempts to indulge Eva's autistic behaviors have prevented the child from developing the coping skills she will need to function in the real world. Dr. Whitman's residential program offers the structured intervention that Eva requires to reach her full potential. The argument was polished, professional, and perfectly aligned with societal expectations about disability intervention and appropriate parenting choices. When it was Malina's turn, she stood with the quiet confidence that had served her in boardrooms around the world, but this time she was fighting for something more important than market share or profit margins. Your Honor, 6 months ago, my daughter was a child trapped in constant distress, unable to connect with others, struggling to express her remarkable intelligence and creativity. Today, she is a confident, articulate, socially connected child who has learned to advocate for her needs and support other children in their growth. The difference isn't that she has become less autistic, it's that she has been allowed to become authentically herself. Malina presented the documentation from the Possibility Project, including video testimony from all 8 children explaining their experiences and growth. She called Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams, and Dr. Santos to testify about alternative approaches to supporting neurodivergent children. She presented Eva's artwork and Marcus's mathematical compositions and Sophie's analytical writings as evidence of cognitive sophistication that traditional assessments had missed. But the moment that changed everything came when Judge Morrison asked to hear from Eva herself. Eva approached the witness stand with the careful deliberation that characterized all her movements, wearing her favorite blue dress and carrying a small portfolio of her recent artwork. Judge Morrison's chambers had been modified with softer lighting and noise-dampening materials at Dr. Chen's request, creating an environment where Eva could communicate authentically rather than being overwhelmed by sensory stress. Eva, do you understand why we're here today? Judge Morrison asked gently. Yes. My daddy thinks I need to be fixed, and my mama thinks I need to be understood. You have to decide which one is right. The clarity of Eva's response surprised everyone in the courtroom. At 8 years old, she had articulated the fundamental philosophical difference that separated the two approaches to her care. And what do you think you need? Eva was quiet for a moment, her hands moving in the small, repetitive patterns that helped her process complex information. I think I need people who see that I'm not broken. I think I need friends who understand about colors and sounds and feelings that don't have words yet. I think I need grown-ups who help me learn about the world without making me pretend to be someone different. Can you tell me about your friendship with Becca? Eva's face lit up with the kind of joy that was impossible to fake. Becca understands about important things. She knows that colors have feelings, and that some sounds hurt, and that sometimes your brain needs quiet time to work properly. When I'm with Becca, I don't have to explain why I see blue in music or why loud noises make my shoulders go up. She just knows. And what would happen if you couldn't be friends with Becca anymore? For the first time, Eva's composure wavered slightly. I would be sad. Really, really sad. Like gray sad, not just blue sad, because finding someone who understands the important things is very rare and I don't want to lose it. Judge Morrison made notes, then asked the question that everyone in the courtroom was waiting for. Eva, if you could choose where to live and how to learn, what would you choose? Eva looked across the courtroom at Malina, then at David, her expression serious and thoughtful. I would choose to live with people who love me exactly as I am. I would choose to learn in places where different kinds of thinking are welcome. I would choose to have friends who speak my language and grown-ups who help me learn new languages without making me forget my own. She paused, then added with the kind of wisdom that sometimes emerged from children who had been forced to understand adult complexities too early. I think everyone should get to choose those things, not just me. The courtroom was completely silent as Eva returned to her seat beside Malina. Judge Morrison reviewed her notes, then called for a brief recess to review Dr. Whitman's evaluation, which had not yet been read into the record. When court reconvened 30 minutes later, Dr. Whitman was called to testify. His testimony would either validate David's petition for conventional intervention or support Malina's advocacy for acceptance-based approaches. Dr. Whitman, you've evaluated Eva and observed her in both traditional and alternative learning environments. What are your professional recommendations? Dr. Whitman stood with the authority of his credentials and experience, but when he spoke, his words surprised everyone in the courtroom. Your Honor, I came to this evaluation prepared to recommend intensive behavioral intervention based on my assessment of Eva's autism severity and functional limitations. However, my observations over the past week have forced me to reconsider fundamental assumptions about appropriate care for neurodivergent children. He paused, looking at Eva before continuing. In traditional assessments, Eva presents as a child with significant autistic behaviors requiring intensive modification. However, in environments designed to accommodate rather than modify her neurological differences, she demonstrates sophisticated cognitive abilities, creative intelligence, social connection skills, and emotional regulation that exceed expectations for neurotypical children her age. Are you saying that Eva doesn't need therapeutic intervention? I'm saying that Eva needs environmental accommodation rather than behavioral modification. The difference is profound. One approach assumes she is broken and needs to be fixed. The other assumes she is whole and needs support in navigating a world that wasn't designed for her neurological profile. Whitman's testimony continued for another 20 minutes, during which he systematically dismantled the case for residential treatment and built an argument for the kind of acceptance-based support that the Possibility Project had demonstrated. In my professional opinion, he concluded, removing Eva from the environment where she has demonstrated remarkable growth in favor of intensive behavioral modification would be detrimental to her continued development and emotional well-being. When Dr. Whitman finished his testimony, Judge Morrison called for final arguments. David's attorney attempted to salvage his case by arguing that conventional approaches were safer and more predictable than experimental methods. But the evidence was overwhelming. Eva was thriving in ways that residential treatment could never achieve. Malina's closing argument was simple and direct. Your Honor, the choice before this court is not between two different therapeutic approaches. It's between two different ways of understanding human diversity. Eva is not a problem to be solved. She is a child to be loved, supported, and allowed to develop her extraordinary potential in ways that honor rather than suppress her authentic self. Judge Morrison retired to her chambers for deliberation, leaving both families to wait in the charged atmosphere of a courtroom where fundamental questions about disability, parenting, and human worth had been debated with extraordinary stakes. 2 hours later, Judge Morrison returned with her decision. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, this court finds that the current custody arrangement serves the best interests of the minor child. Eva Ward will remain in the primary custody of her mother, Malina Ward, with continued supervised visitation with her father. The relief that flooded through Malina was so intense that she nearly collapsed. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds that the educational and therapeutic approaches demonstrated in the so-called Possibility Project represent innovative and effective methods for supporting neurodivergent children. The court recommends that these methods be studied and potentially implemented more broadly to benefit other children with similar needs. As they left the courthouse, Malina realized that they had won something much larger than a custody battle. They had established legal precedent for acceptance-based approaches to neurodivergent children. They had demonstrated that alternative methods could produce superior outcomes when they honored, rather than suppressed, neurological differences. Most importantly, they had proven that Eva and children like her deserved to be understood rather than fixed, supported rather than modified, loved rather than corrected. 6 months later, the Ward Hale Learning Center opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn, serving 36 neurodivergent children whose families had been searching for alternatives to conventional approaches. Eva and Becca were among the first students, no longer the only children who understood about color-sound synesthesia and mathematical emotions and the importance of quiet spaces in overwhelming worlds. Lucas served as educational director, bringing his hard-won wisdom about supporting neurodivergent children to a growing community of families who had chosen acceptance over normalization. Dr. Chen led the clinical team documenting outcomes that challenged traditional metrics of success and demonstrated the profound importance of environmental accommodation. Malina had stepped back from daily operations at her pharmaceutical company to focus on building something that felt more important than profit margins. A place where different kinds of minds were celebrated rather than corrected, where children learned to see their neurological differences as sources of strength rather than deficits to overcome. The center's walls were covered with artwork that revealed the sophisticated inner worlds of children whose intelligence had been underestimated, whose creativity had been suppressed, whose authentic selves had been deemed inappropriate for public consumption. Marcus's mathematical sculptures sat beside Luna's synesthetic paintings, and James's narrative illustrations, and Alex's observational studies of animal behavior that had been translated into insights about human social dynamics. But the most prominently displayed piece was Eva's latest creation, a large collaborative mural that she and Becca had painted with input from every child in the center. It showed a world where differences were not just tolerated, but treasured, where the unique perceptions of neurodivergent minds contributed to a richer, more beautiful, more complete understanding of reality. At the center of the mural, 2 figures stood. Hand in hand, one seeing music in colors, one seeing emotions in patterns, surrounded by a community of other figures, each contributing their own unique ways of perceiving and understanding the world around them. Above the mural in Eva's careful handwriting were the words that had become the center's unofficial motto. This place is for anyone who ever felt like a puzzle piece in the wrong box. On a Tuesday evening in late spring, as the center was closing for the day, Malina found herself standing in the main learning space watching the last few children gather their artwork and say goodbye to friends who understood them, in ways the outside world often couldn't. Eva and Becca were collaborating on their latest project, a sensory garden designed to provide different kinds of environmental support for children with varying needs. They worked with the focused intensity that characterized all their creative partnerships, discussing color combinations and texture patterns and sound-dampening techniques with the expertise of architects planning a cathedral. "Mama Bum," Eva said, looking up from her garden plans. Remember when you used to worry that I was broken? Malina knelt down beside her daughter, thinking about all the specialists and therapists and well-meaning advisors who had tried to convince her that Eva needed to be fixed. I remember thinking that I didn't know how to help you be happy. And now I know that you were never broken. You just needed people who could see how beautifully your mind works. Eva nodded solemnly, then returned to her garden plans with Becca. As they worked, they talked about the children who would use the space, Marcus, who needed areas with mathematical precision, Sophie, who required quiet zones for processing complex information, James, who thought better when he could move freely, Luna, whose synesthesia required careful attention to color combinations, Alex, whose social anxiety needed gradual exposure opportunities, Kai, whose echolalic patterns created their own form of musical expression. Watching them plan for the needs of other children with the same care and attention they brought to their own friendship, Malina understood that something profound had emerged from that night 6 months ago when a janitor had blown soap bubbles to calm her daughter's distress. They had built more than a school or a therapeutic program. They had created a community where neurodivergent children could exist without apology, where their unique ways of processing the world were valued rather than corrected, where difference was understood as diversity rather than deficiency. As the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the Learning Center's windows in shades that Eva would later describe as hope gold and future orange, Malina realized that the custody battle had been about much more than one family's struggle to understand and support a neurodivergent child. It had been about the fundamental question of what it means to be human in a world that too often demands conformity as the price of acceptance. It had been about the radical possibility that some children don't need to be fixed because they were never broken in the first place. And in a renovated warehouse filled with the artwork and laughter and authentic self-expression of 36 extraordinary children, that possibility had become reality. Eva looked up from her garden plans one more time, her face radiant with the confidence that came from being known and loved exactly as she was. "Mama, do you know what color today feels like? What color, sweetheart?" Eva smiled the same brilliant smile that had appeared when she'd created her first perfect soap bubble 6 months earlier. "Today feels like rainbow, not just one color, but all the colors working together to make something more beautiful than any of them could be alone." And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of transformation that love and acceptance could create, Malina understood that her daughter had given her the most precious gift of all, the ability to see the world not as it was, but as it could be, when everyone was allowed to contribute their own unique color to the spectrum of human experience. The Bubble Man had shown them something beautiful that night in the marble lobby of Ward Core Tower. But Eva and Becca and all the children who had followed them had turned that beautiful moment into something even more extraordinary, a place where different minds could flourish, where authentic selves could emerge without fear, where love really could change the world one extraordinary child at a time.